Alright, tonight we are going to be talking about the remaining two pieces of MVC. We talked about the controller on Friday night and got a tiny amount of practice actually creating a controller and adding some methods to it. And tonight we're going to continue on talking about the model and the view. So we're going to be building on the project that we did Friday night. So you guys hopefully saved your stuff because we're going to be working on it. And if you didn't, you just recreate it, don't take them, and make it prettier, I guess. So, all right. So we briefly addressed this Friday night. The model manages the behavior and data of your application domain. So it kind of reflects exactly what is in your database or wherever you're storing your data. It's going to respond to instructions to change your state, which typically is going to come from the controller. And as we discussed, the controller is going to manage your communications between your view and your model. It's the lowest level of the pattern, which is responsible for maintaining data. Right? And the classes that we set up represent the data of your application, and we use validation logic to enforce the business rules for your data. So this is the layer where you're actually going to apply that business logic. And I just created a sample of what a model looks like. By convention, we include our models in the models folder in our MVC projects, and they'll create those folders for you automatically. In an MVC project, it'll already have that models folder, and so you can put it in there. I created a tiny little model of a vehicle. Typically, I know in our databases we track a whole lot more information about vehicles than just these few little pieces of data. It's shut now. So, but just to keep from getting too wordy, I just limited it to a few fields or properties that we're going to track. So I listed the vehicle ID, the VIN, the year, the make, and the model. And they're set up, with our getters and setters. And this is going to reflect typically what you would see in a database. You have a vehicles table with these fields in your table. So does anyone have any questions about creating models? No, looks super fun and easy. Yeah, I thought so. So, why don't we get that project out that we worked on last week, and let's go ahead and add a couple of models to it. One of the things that we can add, which is not here in my model. Okay, what did you do to make it go full screen? That and you said good.
Function envelope.
Oh, there we go. Yeah. Sorry. It's okay. We need a musical interlude. All right. So here you'll see. My project for a minute. I was playing around with this beforehand. So we have that same vehicle. Except for now, what we have included is an owner class. So if we look at the models, we have a model for the person, and we also have a model for the vehicle. So person is a person ID, a first name, and a last name, right? So now when we look at our vehicle, we have this complex object. So it's made up of, the vehicle includes a person object, which is the owner of the vehicle, all right? So you can connect your classes this way and make those relationships. If you'll notice what we've done here, if you don't instantiate your objects, it'll give you null references when you start trying to run things with these complex objects. So on our constructor for our vehicle, we go ahead and say we also have a new person, so that it's an empty person that's sitting out there that we can add information to. Okay.
So to access
yes.
the variables in the person, then you just have to go, let's say vehicle
Dot owner dot,
dot
like first name.
Yeah,
or-
first name.
Yeah, exactly. So, all right, does that make sense?
So what are we supposed to be doing?
So now what I want you guys to do is, we're dealing with our address book, and so, you'll have your contacts in your address book, and, so create a contact as a class, and that contact, you should also create an address as a class, and that way that your contact could have multiple addresses. Alright, so, the address will be stored separately, so it'll be its own class.
Can you increase the font size a little bit?
Yes. I'll also close that. Alright. And see if I can do this one right here. Too much. It's okay if the getters and setters are hidden. They're pretty standard. So you guys are going to be using the address book with a contact object and also an address object, and your contact will have an address. You want to create a model for an address, and you also want to create a model for a contact. And a contact is going to have an address. Yes.
One-to-one?
No, it doesn't have to be one-to-one. They could have multiple addresses, but you don't have to set it up as such.
Roger that.
This is just like hanging out with a bunch of truckers in here.
Oh, not true.
You guys have worse language. If you have any questions, let me know. I'm more than happy to. Do you want to pause this while we're just working at our computers, or do you want to keep it going? I don't
Just keep it going.
Derek will edit this, remember?
We'll do
know.
it.
Sure you will.
Every time you stop it, it cuts it into a chunk, so
Okay.
be like 15 parts.
Easier upload. I'm just kidding. You want to think about your data types, make sure they're accurate, how you would have them stored. Bless you.
So store everything in a string, right?
Yeah, absolutely. Just kidding, just kidding. And incidentally, I did upload on GitHub the class project that you're gonna have. So you guys can pull that down and start working on it. You are allowed to work on it during your work hours. It's still considered work. We're just not gonna work on it in here. So, but you should have hopefully met your mentor by now. You don't have one yet, do you?
No.
Okay. So hopefully, most of you have met your mentor, and if you have questions, you can speak with your mentor, or you can come see me.
And Nick, as long as you're okay with it, Scott will just be a mentor.
Okay.
Because everybody, like, we have like 4 mentors, I think, and we try to split them up. Each of them gets 2, and one that I signed to him didn't end up participating, so just give him to you.
Alright.
Well, there
And if
go.
you don't like
Your
him,
mentor.
you can just change it.
Do you want the address pointing back at its owner?
Not yet.
Just make it long.
Yeah, that's all we're doing so so far. I mean, we're gonna add some stuff later, but yeah, trying to just kind of move along. That's a lot, so I don't know, I can't.
Should the address have an identifier?
Yes.
Are we doing a contact and an address book or just an address?
Well, the address book will be like that, and then kind of the idea of what your project is, and then your contact would be an entry in that address. I mean, in that contact, in your address book.
I have a
Sorry.
question for you.
Yes.
In when you're calling this constructor vehicle, you saying owner equals new person. Did you have to use person before that? I mean, because it's throwing an error on my computer.
If you don't already have the object saved, go ahead and save it and try to build, and then see if it'll pull it in. It doesn't recognize it. Is it in the same namespace?
Yeah, can you show the namespace up top of the
sorry.
vehicle?
Yeah. See, these two are in the same namespace,
Yeah, it seems like.
and you've saved that file. The other one.
Give me. Oh no, I haven't saved the file.
Okay.
And,
Oh, yeah. So everybody got this done? Pretty comfortable with them? There'll be time at the end, I'm sure, if you haven't finished them.
So we're not doing the vehicles?
I'm sorry?
We're not doing the vehicles?
No, you're doing this in your project from the other night, so this, your address book, yeah. I'm sorry, I have the, actually have the assignment, but it's just on a different side, so. I should pass those out or something ahead of time. I'm sorry, I'll try to split those up next time so that they're divided, like what we're actually working on, so you'll have something to kind of go by. But I wanted you to be able to see the code while you're doing it. So again, just looking at your, at the example here, the vehicle has an owner, so we have all of our information about our vehicle. And then one of the items is an owner. This is our constructor. We're actually just initializing that person object or instantiating it inside of our constructor so that it will actually exist and not be null if you try to reference it. So anytime a vehicle gets created, a person gets created along with it as the owner. That way you can access it when you say vehicle.owner. Otherwise, it's if you try to access like owner.firstname and you haven't instantiated the owner yet, it'll give you a null reference. So we're just doing that in our constructor. All right. Now, eventually, we'll tie these back in with our databases and actually start storing information. I'm going to show you some stuff tonight, but we're not actually going to, we won't be saving it to database or anything like that because we haven't gotten to that part. So we're just going through getting to the beginning pieces. So, all right. Before we move forward, does anybody have any questions about the models or how they're created or what they're based on, what kind of information? Did you guys want to discuss kind of what kind of properties you're going to track in your contacts? Okay, what are you tracking? I didn't give y'all a list today. I never gave you any kind of definitions of what you had to include.
Name and address of the
Your name and address. Did you separate the name into first and last, or did you just do name?
this name, but we can separate them if you want.
Mm-hmm.
I had person name, and I had their address, and I also had an identifier.
Okay.
Yeah, you need a unique identifier.
Yeah. Yeah, you definitely want an identifier. And I know this is like some people just do ID. I always typically do the class name and the ID. Any framework I think will pick up either one. If you just name your identifier ID, it'll still read it. Or you can name it the same as your class. So if address is your class, you can do it address ID. And then if for your contact, you can do contact ID if contact is the name of your class. That's typically the way I do it. To me, it's just easier to read that way. But you do need to follow that convention with entity framework. Do you guys not want to track anything else about people in your address book other than just their address? Phone number, yeah. Like when I was just making them, and again, there's like no right or wrong answer, but I mean, I was trying to flesh them out as much as possible, just to make your projects a little more useful or a little more realistic, really. Say again?
Because I play with the different data types. Like,
Yeah.
One that I played around with was like birth date. It's not necessarily something that you would keep in your address book, but it does introduce like the date time type. So I would say play with that because you're gonna learn more.
Right. I track email address as well.
But that's gonna be a string again.
Yep, that is a good machine. But birth date is a good one. Also, I keep birth dates in my contact list. Not that anybody has to thanks to Facebook, but hey, what's up?
Do you know when you made the control which option you chose?
Yes, just do an empty controller. I think they just used the default home controller and changed the names the other night, so, but this will be easier. Keep it from being alright.
I have a question.
Sure.
Like we initialized address as a constructor in contacts, right?
Uh-huh.
But I want to make a list of addresses. So do I have to initialize a list of address, or a single class initialization would be good enough? And I just do like a public list address and address.
If you're gonna include it as a list, yeah, you can, you need to go ahead and initialize it as a list.
As a list.
Yeah, instead of just as a general, just as an individual object. And then you can just add to it. Yeah.
What is the purpose of initializing it in the constructor?
what is the purpose of it? We already talked about that.
Well, like, I said,
Oh,
I mean,
you-
I heard you say like you won't get null references, but what does that
Be-
actually mean?
Because I did talk about this already. It's because when you first call it, anytime you create a vehicle, you need to go ahead and have that person object initialized, because that way you will have access to the owner's methods. Is that not what you're
The
asking?
methods and the properties.
Yeah.
Right. So like for instance with the list, if you didn't initialize the list, you wouldn't have access to like the add method because it would be null, so it wouldn't know what you were talking about. I'm sorry, if you already said that. I apologize.
Well, I thought I did. Maybe I wasn't clear enough. So. Okay. Let's go ahead and move forward. I mean, we have lots of time. I'm not like super rushed tonight for a change, but you guys want to look at database stuff?
Hmm.
Yeah. Anybody want to help with database stuff?
Passed it once, don't want to again.
Okay. Maybe a team player there, Derek. I'm just kidding.
It's gonna be alright with you.
Alright. So, the final part of MVC is the view. And the purpose of your view is going to be to format and display your response to the client. So, there's your output, effectively. It can display all or just a portion of the model to the user. You don't necessarily always have to display everything that is stored about an object. Okay, so some things we might want to hide and not let our user see, and that's okay. You can still hide some information. Your views are going to be made up of template files that your application uses to dynamically generate responses. So this will allow it to, if you have a list, it can populate your list for you. It's going to be done in HTML. Typically, we'll use Razor, and we'll talk about view engines in a second, but that's what we usually use. That was a hard transition since I was so used to just hand coding HTML for so long. And honestly, thank God for view engines, because I just hate writing plain HTML all the time. But that's the format that's going to generate. You're going to get HTML regardless. So it can be any an output representation of your information. So you can print out charts, diagrams, things like that, and it can change depending. And the example we have there is, you can have the same information but printed out as a bar chart for management, and then as a table for your accountants, right? So depending on how they want to consume the information, you can display it to them in different formats. So the views give you all the abilities to actually go in and customize that. I've just got a sample here. Like I said, I have a tendency now not to really want to write a whole lot of HTML, but this is not one that's generated with the scaffolding of the default stuff that Razor will do for you if you go in and create a view. And I'll show you that in just a second. When you create a view, you can tell it to do scaffolding. It'll give you all sorts of things that are in there that you may or may not want. If you want it, it's fine. But typically, what I'll do is I'll let it scaffold, and then I go in and rip out all the stuff that I don't want, just to save me the effort of typing a bunch of stuff that I might not necessarily want. I know some people are much more comfortable writing it themselves, and so it's up to you. If you're comfortable in there, do it. There's absolutely nothing wrong. It's not going to affect it by not letting it scaffold, as long as you get all the information in there that you need. In this sample, sorry. All right. At the top, we've included a model, and all this is saying, this was just a sample view that I've done, and a lot of times we're using models to base what our view is on. So depending on what kind of information, it also controls what kind of objects get passed into the view and out of the view. All right. So here, model will represent should be search view model. This is what drives me crazy. All right. And then we just have a plain H2 that's a search. It's going to pop up search at the top. But some of it is just pulled over from a scaffold, and then I ripped stuff out. So then we show the form that we're beginning, because this is actually going to submit. It is a form instead of just display. So the search form is going to take in some VIN number, and supposedly it's going to print back out the vehicle that matches that. It doesn't do that, by the way, but it will take the information in and give you the same page back. But in this case, we just have a text box written there that allows the user to enter in their VIN, and you see it's tied into the model. So we say model, and then we have our lovely lambda expressions. So it's tied into the model.vin. So if you go into the search view model, it has an actual VIN. And then the next line is for the validation message. So these, again, they come with a lot of the Bootstrap stuff is written into it, and CSS and everything. So are y'all comfortable with that? Do I need to go into like all the divs and stuff like that? I don't want to worry all that. Anyway, but your validation message will when you do your when you decorate your model with attributes, it will populate your validation stuff for you. So if there is a problem on that field, this is the box that is set there for them to display the message on. So it all ties in really nicely, and it's really easy to do, and most stuff is done for you. So it makes it pretty simple. But it knows that it's for the VIN. So if there's a problem with the VIN, when you try to submit, it'll kick it back and print that message out there. So, all right, and then at the bottom I have my submit button, just to tell it to submit. So let's go and look at actually creating a view. Like I said, I have a few that are already created in here. Maybe I'll leave this out so you can see it. Again, I've got the two controllers, the home controller and the vehicle controller. And I have a model for the person, a model for the vehicle. And I also have a view model that's set up for the search. And we'll talk about view models in a second, but that's the one that we were referencing just a moment ago. And I'm just going to make up an action for my controller here. I had the add vehicle, the display all of the vehicles in the search, and then I had an action for show details. And we can look at this in just a second. Create another one. Sort of inaccurate. We probably just would want an integer. We can get our vehicle ID. Alright. So as you can see, I don't have a view set up to delete the vehicle. We'll just assume that they're going to give us the VIN and we'll delete that vehicle. This is not something we're probably ever going to let anybody get to do, maybe, but maybe on your contacts, on your address book, you can delete the contacts, right? So that's no big deal. So if I want to create a view, I can right click here and go add view. You can also go to your view folder and right click there and add a view. But here, if you do it from here, it's automatically going to populate that name for you so that it knows that you're adding a view that's supposed to delete a vehicle. All right, so that's our view name. Now we can do the template. You have some options. Create gives you all the text boxes so that when you hit submit, you can take all the information in and save a new object. Delete, which maybe I should do delete, but we're not going to do a whole one, so well, I'll do it anyway. You can see what happens. But depending on which one of these you choose, it's going to generate a certain number of controls for you. So these are your default actions that you're going to take. And then you can also do it when it's empty, where it's not tied into a model at all. So it's not related to that. And then of course you have lists, so that if you have you wanted to print out all of your contacts or something like that, you can do lists, and it generates the controls so that it just goes through and populates for you. So again, a lot of this has to be tied into the database to be fully functional, but the views are set up to do certain tasks for you. So I'm just going to hit delete and see what happens. So one of those things that we'll just guess on, and I'll do vehicle just to see what happens. I'll go ahead and hit add, and it's going to generate this view for me, and you can see what it looks like. It comes out. It says we have our vehicle up here, that this is the kind of object that we're dealing with, and change that to say delete vehicle. Delete this there. Are you sure you want it to delete this vehicle? And so it's going to display all this information, which means that when we call this, we really need to pass it a particular vehicle. So, yeah, I think this is going to probably give me problems. As we don't have a vehicle that we're telling it, no, it's just empty. Okay, so it doesn't have any of the information on it because we didn't give it any information in our model. That this model here is empty, and the reason that it's empty is because when we called it from delete vehicle, we didn't send it any information here. If you want that information displayed, you have to pass it into your view. Okay, so I don't like that, so I'm going to just stop it and delete it, and I'm going to use that other model. I like to reuse stuff. So I'm going to come to my view. I'm just going to delete that one. I don't like it. Alright. So I'll go there, add view again. This time I'm going to do it. Alright. So we have all these different controls. And you see how much different the code that's generated, the view gets generated depending on what you're trying to do with it. Now I use the search view model this time instead of a vehicle. That way all it has is the item for the bin. And also, see, it adds all this stuff like back to list and things like that. I'm going to delete that. I don't want a little link at the bottom that's like, here, go back to the list. We don't have a list. So I'm just going to remove that. And that's what I mean by allowing it to do this scaffolding for you, just building all this stuff. Sometimes you're going to throw some stuff in there that's just default and you don't want it. So if you do that, not that it's impossible to do it, but if you do it, you should go in and really inspect the code and what it's doing for you. I mean that kind of is given, like if you're letting anything generate for you, you should try to understand what it's actually doing, because otherwise, once it breaks, you're not gonna know how to fix it. So, let me see what we got going on now. Let's try to delete that vehicle now. So we get a different view now. It's just got the text box in there, so I can say, no, well, I want to delete this one. And of course, it says create because I thought it was create. I didn't edit this very closely. So now this looks like it would do something, but it doesn't, because again, no database, no any kind of persistence at all behind it. Do y'all have any questions about this?
So,
Yes.
when you created the delete vehicle view, which options did you select again?
The first time or the second time, because I did it twice. I'm sorry. The second time I did it as a create. It's because I wanted those text boxes in there, and it was I was just kind of playing around with it. There wasn't anything specific to reason that I did that.
The reason why the code was generated then was because you had something different in your create function in the controller?
No, what happens is when you're selecting which template that you want, if you tell it you want to just do a details view about an object, it assumes certain things about what you're actually going to display. So it kind of gives you like these defaults. What create does, it goes through for your model and it goes, well, you need to enter all this data. So depending on the data types, it's going to give you controls for each one. So for like a string, it's going to give you a text box. For a date time, does it automatically give you a date picker? Does it do that?
No, date.
Huh?
HTML5 has a new date object, but not.
Okay, it doesn't by default. You have to pick. I can't remember. But anyway, it's gonna, depending on what you give it. If you give it a list, it'll give you a drop-down box. So it bases those controls on what is actually included in the model. So for a create, it's giving you the way to tell it that information. If you're just displaying details about it, it's just going to give you labels that print it out and show you. And that's what the first one I did. On the delete, all it was doing was saying, here's Johnny Smith, here's his, like this is an example, but it would just say that information. Are you sure you want to delete it? So you can actually just see all the information. So it didn't give you any actual, any way to like type in and tell it something that you were looking for. So that's why I chose create, because I wanted a text box on there so that I could type in a bin. Yeah.
Because it was empty.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So, yeah, and I just encourage you to play with that stuff and just look at it. And again, you can always, like, if I had known that it was just a text box I wanted, probably what I would have done is gone and like just copied the code for a text box on the VIN from something else that already existed and pull it in. I mean, you can do that. There's nothing magic about the HTML that gets created. It's just